now watching Way Back Wednesday, sponsored by Davenport Auto Park, the ride of your life. And also sponsored by Flores Glass, serving the area since 1977 with residential and commercial work.
Well, good evening, friends, and welcome to another episode of Way Back Wednesday. I'm Randy Adcox. Today is May Day. Happy May Day to you. We're going to talk a little bit about May Day later on in the show. We did a little history research for the night's show. Learned some things about May Day I did not know, and perhaps you might not know these things either, so we'll share those later on. We're going to also talk a bit more about some spur tracks around Rocky Mount. You know, after last week's show, had a couple conversations with Eric and a couple other people, and it's no understatement to say there were spur tracks all over Rocky Mount for many, many years, going back literally to a very short period of time after the railroad came through here. They began shooting spur tracks off of it. And so I began to do a little more digging into that, and it dawned on me that as much as we covered during last week's show about the spur track going from Main Street to Rocky Mount Mills, one thing we didn't talk about was when it was put into place. And so I did a little digging, and I stumbled across a really neat piece of literature from the National Register of Historic Places. And it talks about the Rocky Mount Mill Village historic history in general, but it's got a lot of neat information about the mill. I've read this document before. It's several pages long. And it's really interesting. If you like history of Rocky Mount Mills in particular, you can go online, you can do a search for it. It's called the National Register of Historic Places, and you can just do a search for Rocky Mount Mills. And this particular, I just printed off a segment of it, and I think this is like, I don't know, a couple, 3 pages here, but I think the whole thing is a couple dozen pages. But it goes into some detail about Rocky Mount Mills and the history of the mill and so forth. So I want to start the show off tonight and just talk a little bit about what's in this document and how it relates to that spur track that was eventually put in place between Main Street and Rocky Mount Mills. In 1886, James H. Ruffin, an experienced mill operator from Lowell, Massachusetts, was hired as superintendent and proved to be invaluable in restoring the mill's productivity. The mill also benefited from the help of Paul C. Cameron, a leading post-war industrialist and railway and road builder, and the mill's largest stockholder. Cameron encouraged many of the stockholders to use their influence in obtaining loans for the mill, thus bolstering its capital. I should have prefaced this by saying this was, there's several paragraphs preceding what I just read there, and it was talking about some of their early times and some of the rough times, frankly, the mill went through, where it struggled financially. If you remember, the mill was started in 1818, and like most new businesses, it went through cycles where business was good and business was not so good for a spell. And so anyway, that's when they brought in this James H. Ruffin in 1886. And it goes on to say, the late 19th century marked a period of rapid expansion for Rocky Mount Mills and its village. In 1887, the mill was in full operation, running 12 hours a day. A year later, Thomas H. Battle was elected as company president, and under his direction, a second mill building was built in 1889. In this same year, shipping problems of the company were simplified when a spur line was completed connecting the plant with the Wilmington and Welding Railroad, later the Atlantic Coastline Railroad. The company bought additional equipment and increased the number of spindles from 3,500 in 1886 to 25,000 in 1892. Also in that year, a new auxiliary steam plant was added to supplement the factory's water power. A third mill building was added to the complex in 1894. So it was 1889 that Rocky Mount Mills persuaded the railroad to put a spur track from the main line down Main Street, Rocky Mount, over to Rocky Mount Mills. And then, of course, there were spur tracks coming off that spur track all along the way, feeding tobacco warehouses and so forth, and various businesses that would, as I said last week, would ship products out using the railway and also receive products in from the railway. So Lee, let's go ahead and put up picture number 1 here. And I wanted to intentionally give the viewers a chance to call in tonight. I know in past shows I've spent a lot of time showing pictures one right behind the other and didn't give you much time to call in. And frankly, I intentionally scaled back the number of pictures that I was going to share on tonight's show. So I'm welcoming your calls. 407-1111 is the number. This was a neat picture I found. It's on the water bonds. In an effort to promote the water bond election, this railway car has been moved to various spur tracks in the city. By the way, I should have said this was from January the 11th of 1969. This picture appeared in the paper. It says it would take 1,000 of these 10,000-gallon cars to furnish the daily water supply in Rocky Mount. 11,000, it says if 1,000 of these cars were filled up, the length would be about 10 miles. The water bond election of $3 million for water improvements set for Tuesday. So this was just, they parked this thing on a spur track there in downtown Rocky Mount as just a reminder that they were trying to raise money to sell these water bonds and so forth. And I didn't recall ever seeing this photograph before. Like I said, it appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram January the 1st of 1969. And I guess the point here is that in addition to being used to both ship out and receive in products and needed supplies for the plants and the business operations that were along these spur tracks, they were sometimes used just for promotional purposes too. They would park a box car, or in this case, a water bond car, a water car, tanker car, and use it for like a giant billboard. So anyway, but like I said, the railroad spur for the Rocky Mountain Mills was put in place in 1889, and obviously it was a major boon to everything along the spur track. Let's go on, if we could, now to item number 2. In April of 1959, this picture appeared, and it says, "Presto, like magic, the Atlantic Coastline Railroad spur track along Southwest Main Street between Sunset and Western Avenue disappeared Wednesday. ACL workmen in one day took up the rails and ties. The track was taken up after an announcement that the ACL would give 10 feet of property on each side of its track for the widening of Main Street on both sides and west of the tracks." And we've talked before about, there was a time when there was 2 and 3 segments of tracks going down Main Street for a section anyway, for a short distance. And so when the decision was made to widen Main Street, they had to take up one of these pieces of track. And you see there, they've taken it up on the west side, southwest side of the Main Street there. And in the background, you can see People's Bank building there, about midway your screen near the top. And so you're looking roughly northeast here in this diagram here. So anyway, spur tracks were put in place. They were taken up. They were used for a number of years in some cases. And they're still, if you look hard enough, you can still find evidence of spur tracks around Rocky Mount. I've got a map that we'll show you in just a minute. In fact, it's the same map we showed last week. I just put it in a format I can put on the screen for you, make it a little easier to see, hopefully. And it shows a bunch of these spur tracks. Eric was telling me about a spur track that was off of the section of the track over by Cokie Road. There's a couple different spur tracks over there. In fact, we'll get to those in a minute. And I looked, I did look, tried to find some kind of history about those tracks. So Eric, if you're listening, feel free to call in and give our viewers the history as you remember it. I remember you saying that it was used, I think in part anyway, to get supplies needed to get what was then referred to as the Pine Tops Highway, Cokie Road out that way, for road work and so forth. And I did look, I did search. When you're doing this kind of research and you're looking through literally thousands of pages of documents and newspapers and different things, sometimes you can just look and just not find anything. And so my hope for tonight was to give you a little history lesson about each one of these spur tracks and their particular impact and what they were used for specifically. Like we talked last week about the spur track going to Rocky Mountain Mills. So with that being said, let's go ahead and do item number 4 before we get to the map. Item number 4 is another interesting use of a spur track. And you see here, it says, "Shop at Sears while taking advantage of the downtown babysitting service. Saturday, December 17th, and Monday through Saturday, December 19th through 24. It says if your child is 2 years old or older, there is a downtown babysitting service to accommodate you, while shopping downtown. Just take the children to the caboose located on the spur track at the end of the SL umbrella shed on Main Street, and a group of Rocky Mount Senior High School students will babysit for you at no charge. So, I read this and I had to chuckle. I said, this is something that wouldn't happen today, obviously. I don't see parents dropping off kids as young as 2 years old with total strangers at a caboose on the railroad spur track and saying, watch my kid while I go shopping. But, and by the way, this ad appeared December 15, 1977. So it wasn't that terribly long ago, believe it or not, that they were doing this. But as I said, in today's world, I just don't see this happening. I don't think it would happen anywhere around here anyway. And that's a shame, but, it is what it is, as the old saying goes. And sadly, I guess we're just not quite as trusting of one another as we used to be. And so, like I said, it was a nice idea, it was a nice thought. I don't know how many parents took advantage of it. I'd like to think certainly some did. But, the merchants were, and, this was kind of on the Rocky Mount downtown was in a bit of a decline by 1977, obviously. The heyday of downtown Rocky Mount that was there certainly during the 30s, 40s, 50s, even into the early 60s, was on a decline. Tarrytown Mall had opened up by now, and a lot of stores had began to move from downtown Rocky Mount out to the western part of the city, and little shops began to spring up and down Sunset Avenue, and certainly Tarrytown Mall was a big draw for not only businesses but patrons too, of course. And so merchants who were still operating downtown Rocky Mount were literally, looking for ways to make it easier for folks to come downtown and shop. And if providing a babysitting service would do that, then it was probably worthwhile. Like I said, I'd like to think that some families took advantage of that, but I don't remember ever hearing about it. I was in high school by then, so I certainly wouldn't have had a need for it myself, but maybe some others did. Okay, I mentioned that we had the map that I showed you last week, the big map that I had printed off on a poster-sized paper. I started to bring that back, but it was just a little bit unwieldy and a little bit difficult for me to manage and point out what I wanted to point out to you. So I took the actual image itself that I had in a digital file format, and by taking that image and putting it into a file we could put on your computers, on your TV screen there, we can zoom in, zoom out, move around. So Lee, without any further ado, let's put up item number 5, which is that 1920 map of Rocky Mount. And I've highlighted every spur track that I could find on the map. So Lee, let's start in the upper left-hand corner where the Rocky Mount Mills is, because interestingly enough, even though that was probably the first, well, I won't say it's the first, it was certainly one of the longest, if not the longest spur track. But there were actually spur tracks coming off the spur tracks, and you'll see what I mean. Lee, zoom in the upper left-hand corner of the image up there, and I've highlighted in yellow a couple of the spur tracks that came off the main line. Can we get a zoom on that? Okay, Lee's working on the zoom for us, so bear with us just a minute. But as I said, there were spur tracks all over the city, and as he gets the zoom fixed there and get that working, we'll show you some of these other spur tracks. But coming off the main line, running north-south through Rocky Mount, there were spur tracks, of course, going off. There were main line tracks, I should say, also coming off going west toward Nashville, Spring Hope, and eventually on to Raleigh and so forth. And of course, spur tracks headed east toward Tarboro and points further east. But in the immediate city of Rocky Mount, there's probably no less than a half a dozen, if not a dozen, spur tracks coming off the main tracks. And as I said earlier, there are, if you know where to look, there you go. Now let's see if we can go up to the upper left-hand corner. There you go. Keep going, keep going. There you go. Right there, what I've got highlighted in yellow in your upper left-hand section of the screen up there. There you go. There's actually, you see there's 2 spur tracks there. You see the main line that kind of curves down roughly from the upper left to the lower right. That curvy line is that spur track that runs all the way to Main Street. But at the very tip of it, up there at the mill itself, there's actually 2 spur tracks coming off that spur track. They form kind of a lazy Y there, if you will. And of course, one of them crosses, well, they both cross Falls Road actually. And that was something that I did not remember. As a child, I remember going across the by the mill there on Falls Road and riding across the railroad tracks. Even as a young adult, I remember riding out and riding on the railroad tracks. They're gone now, of course. But I did not realize that there were actually, if you look at that picture, in 1920, there was a split, if you will, a branch of the spur track. And so it actually crossed Falls Road in two areas. And so in later years, they took away one of them, of course, and just left the one. And now they're both gone. But I thought that was interesting that as much as I knew about the spur track down there going to the mill, I never knew that it, at one time it had branched and split and was two sections going across there. So, okay, so now if you come down Lee, another thing about this map that I found very interesting is it highlights old sections of Rocky Mount. You'll notice right there where that, there you go, Lee, stop right there. You see there, that yellow rectangle, there's a spur track coming off there, off the main spur track, that kind of goes in roughly a southerly direction. And just to the right of that, you see the word Tobacco Town. That's what they refer to, where all the tobacco houses were and so forth. And then to the left of that, you see where it says Happy Hill. And all over this map, if you zoom in all over, you'll see little areas like that are identified. Happy Hill, Villa Place, Germantown, there's one called Jackson, there's an area called Crosstown. And if you remember, it's been several months we talked about these little communities that were all over Rocky Mount. Williford Town's another one. Some of these I had heard of and some I did not, and I didn't realize that they were highlighted on this 1920 map of Rocky Mount. So anyway, coming on down, if you would just kind of pan down now, Lee, and I first draw your attention over to the left-hand side. There's a spur track there. Okay, hold right there. On the left-hand side of your screen, there's a spur track there that comes off that track that heads westerly, and it goes by the old Tar River Lumber Company. The old Rocky Mount Senior High School eventually was built. And the spur track right there, and of course it allowed lumber to be loaded up on boxcars and so forth and shipped away, and supplies brought back in by train, of course, too. And then if you come down a little bit further, there about middle way to screen, you see another little spur track there. And then just to the right of that, there's another spur track. And right there, that elongated oval-shaped circle I've got there, kind of middle of the screen, a little more to the right, that's that section that comes off the main right there by the old city lunch and goes behind. In fact, there's a part of that track still there. If you want to see an old section of old spur track, you can go down there, and right there where the city lunch was and the Bluebird taxi cab office, there's a piece of that old spur track behind that wedge-shaped building there on the corner of Main Street and Marigold Street. And I've been down there and actually seen this spur track. It's not much of it left, but there's a piece of it that runs behind that building. And of course, it crossed over Marigold Street and went behind some of those furniture stores down there and allowed freight to be brought in and delivered to the grocery store that was down there. I think George Evers grocery store was down there. And then of course, there's some furniture stores further on. And so that spur track was used by those businesses there. And one more thing I want to draw your attention to, Lee kind of pan down and kind of pan to the right, in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen there. That's where Eric was telling me, I think, anyway, there's a couple spur tracks down there that were used. There you go. You see there's three right there kind of bunched together, and Cokie Road, I've identified that in red in the bottom right-hand corner. You see Cokie Road there. So on either side of Cokie Road, there were literally three spur tracks in that one area right there. And if I understood what Eric was telling me when we had this conversation yesterday, I'm sorry, last time we spoke about it, my days are all running together now. But anyway, here we got a call. Here we go. Hello, caller, you on the air?
All right, talking about those spur tracks that was over there on Cokie Road.
There you go.
Oh, you noticed on that map, there's got a little house block, dark black spots that represents a house, a building, or whatever.
Right.
And if the spur track that run off over there and went across Cokie Road, right there at Plow's Oil Mill, it went into a vacant lot where there was no buildings at all, and the spur track just ended. That's where the state of North Carolina brought building materials in to concretely pave Pine Tops Highway, and it opened in 1927.
Okay, and
the track comes off the Tarver Railroad tracks, and the train would have to be moving like the train was coming to Rocky Mount from Tarver to enter the spur track and go down there to a dead-end spur. And there wasn't, I don't think, a building in the entire block. It was just a yard for construction materials to be stored out in the open.
Have you been down there recently to see if there's any of that spur track still in place or it all been taken up?
No, that building, that's long been gone.
Okay.
Spur track come across Cokie Road right there, and about in just towards Tarver from Rocky Mount, right there near where the gates would be on Cokie Road. But the train to get in there would have to be going towards Rocky Mount, like it was going from Tarver to Rocky Mount.
Uh-huh. I see that on the map, yep.
You look at it and you'll see that spur track got put in there to a vacant lot that had no buildings in that block. I think I remember looking at it. And there was an article in the Rocky Mount paper in 1927 when the Pine Tops Highway got paved and thus got dedicated.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for calling and sharing that. I didn't want to tell it wrong, and I knew that you had the information there. So thanks for calling and sharing it with our viewers. I appreciate that.
I understand. Goodbye.
All right, buddy. We'll see you. And that'll take us to our first commercial break. Lee, bring it back to me. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about some spur track history and some of the importance of spur tracks that contributed to the development of other businesses around, not only Rocky Mount, but several areas close to Rocky Mount. So when we come back, we'll show you some more pictures, talk a little bit more about that. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Way Back Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
There's a main nerve that leaves your back that goes into your hip and goes down your leg. It's called the sciatic nerve. A back injury can put pressure on that nerve, causing pain, numbness, tingling. Chiropractors can actually help that. At the Hammer Chiropractic Center on Sunset, we know exactly what to do. We have very good relationships with the doctors in Rocky Mount. We like to co-manage people's care. Some medications may help us do our jobs, and our jobs may help their medications work better.
And we're back. If you're just tuning in, you're watching Way Back Wednesday. I meant to say this at the top of the show, but spread the word. The time slot has changed, and I think that's thrown some folks off. Instead of being from 8 to 9, we're now at 7:30 to 8:30. And so if you've been talking to someone and say, hey, I missed the show last week or I missed part of it, just let them know the time slot has changed. We're now coming on at 7:30 and going off at 8:30. So there you go. And you know, I always forget to do this, and I always intend to for every show, and I apologize to our sponsors for not. But you know, shows like this and all the other programming on WHIG TV would not be possible without our sponsors. So we thank them, we appreciate them, and so if you're out and about visiting any one of the sponsors that you see playing the commercials during the break here, tell them you saw their commercial on WHIG, and just tell them thank you for contributing and sponsoring not only my show, but all the other shows on WHIG. We appreciate you. All righty. So we're talking about spur tracks, and you know, last week's topic of the spur track that ran from the main line all the way out to Rocky Mount Mills kind of touched a nerve with me because I very well remember walking along sections of that track. You know, I grew up part of my childhood anyway on Columbia Avenue, one block off Falls Road. My grandparents on my mother's side lived on Spring Street, and there used to be a lady named Memphis Hardy, Memphis Rackley, I'll get it right in a minute. Memphis Rackley was married to Bobby Rackley, and they lived on West Elm Street. And Memphis babysat a bunch of kids, myself included. And so we would walk, those kids would walk from Wilkinson School down Peachtree Street, cross over that railroad track there by Elm Street, and go turn left and go down to Memphis Rackley's house down the corner, and we would stay there until our parents got off work and come pick us up, because she kept, I don't know, 4 or 5 of us kids there at her house. So every now and again, I'll go down that way, and I always have a flashback to walking down that part of town, coming from school, going over to West Elm Street. And if you're down there now, in the general area where the farmer's market is, if you're headed west, well, you can't head west on, because that's one-way street there now, but if you come in east on Peachtree Street, before you get to the farmer's market, if you look over to the right there, you can see the road bed, the railroad road bed. The tracks are long gone, but you can still make it. It's easier to see in the wintertime when all the leaves are off the trees, but you can clearly see the mound of where the road bed for the spur track used to go through there. And so it was neat to me to see a full layout last week of how that spur track ran, and it got me thinking about, in fact, Eric and I had a conversation after the show last week about there literally being spur tracks all over Rocky Mount. And a lot of those spur tracks were put in place specifically for businesses to use. And so I found some examples of that during my research for tonight's show. So Lee, just put up item number 6 for our viewers. This article appeared in a Nashville Graphic in 1913. And it's, talks about a long ago time. What do we got here? Is that number? Is that number 7?
Number 6.
That's number 6. How in the world? I got my picture out of order. Bear with me, folks. I don't know what I did, but that's not supposed to be number 6. That's actually, we'll get to that in a minute too. That's actually a maypole rising, believe it or not, in Germany. And how I got that so far out of sequence, I don't know. What's the next one, Lee?
Maypole.
Okay. I don't know how this happened. Somehow or another, my pictures are all out of sequence. Well, I mentioned earlier, we may come back to the pictures in a minute. Since we're on the maypole, we'll go ahead and talk about this a bit. I was interesting to my recollection of May Day when I was in school was 1st of May, of course, and we had May Day celebrations in school. We would have them dance around the maypole. And it was just a fun day, and I remember that all the schools around, particularly elementary schools anyway, had a May Day celebration. There was a time in Rocky Mount when May Day was a big event. It was part of, in fact, some of the events leading up to the Gallopade parade and so forth. They kind of took place in the same general time frame, and so it was just a big event. So I found it interesting when I got to doing some digging about how the May Day celebration came to be, and I was kind of shocked because the origin of May Day itself was certainly not a happy and a pleasant event. It actually got started in Europe as a way to support labor. There was obviously, just like the early days of labor in this country, there was widespread abuse and misuse, if you will, of labor. And so in many countries, May 1st is still referred to as Labor Day. Now, we celebrate Labor Day in September, of course, here in this country. I think they do in Canada too, for that matter. But in the early days, and this goes back to the 16th century, some of the earliest notations of any May Day celebration go back to the 16th century. They talk about workers who were, gathering together. This well predates any kind of union or organized labor, obviously, but they would get together and they would say, just to kind of support one another. And so there's a brief article I found here online. I say brief, it's several paragraphs. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But it starts off, says, May Day is technically a European festival of ancient origins, marking the beginning of summer, usually celebrated May 1st, around halfway between the Northern Hemisphere spring equinox and June solstice. Festivities may be held the night before, known as May Eve. Traditions often include gathering wildflowers and green branches, weaving floral garlands, crowning a May Queen, sometimes with a male companion, and setting up a maypole, which we see it being done right here. May tree or May bush, are sometimes referred to, around which people dance and sing. It says bonfires are also a major part of the festival in many regions. Regional varieties and related traditions include, I can't even pronounce this, it looks like Walpurgis Night. It's also been associated with in ancient Roman festival Floralia. It says the earliest known May celebrations appear with the Floralia, Festival of Flora, the Roman goddess of flowers, held from 27 April to 3rd of May during the Roman Republic era. And this is even further back than I realized. I said 16th century, this goes back further than that. But anyway, he goes on to talk about the festivities and so forth and the gatherings. It was later when the socialism came into prominence that May Day kind of took a dark turn because there was so much abuse and frankly, workers were not well treated. They were taken advantage of, working long hours with little pay. And all over Europe, this was the case. And so certainly from Russia and Germany and France and Great Britain, all over Europe, May Day became a celebration of labor. And so let's go on to the next picture. I'm not even sure what we're going to have here now. my organization got all out of whack. This is actually a picture of a May Day celebration from the Netherlands, I believe it is. But in any case, this is what most of us as kids remember. There would be a maypole with some banners or streamers coming off of it, and we would dance around the maypole. I've told this story before, and I'm almost a little embarrassed to tell it again, but I will, because in hindsight, it's kind of a comical thing to occur. But when I was, I guess, 4th or 5th grade, somewhere along in elementary school anyway, we were dancing around the maypole, and you hold hands with the person adjacent either side of you, and you dance one direction, you stop, you dance the other direction. And the young lady I was dancing with just so happened to have an artificial arm. And so we danced 3 or 4 steps in one direction, and we were supposed to stop and dance 3 or 4 steps the other direction. And one of us got our directions mixed up or confused, whatever, I'm not sure. The only thing I know is that she kept going in one direction and I was going in the other direction. And next thing I knew, I had her artificial arm dangling, holding in my hand. And that was, I'm sure, probably more embarrassing for her than it was for me. And I could have crawled in a hole and went away. But in any case, that was my recollection of dancing around the maypole. And to this day, she's sadly deceased now. I hope she's forgiven me in her afterlife, but I'll never forget that day, having that artificial arm in my hand, and the owner of that arm was several feet away from me. Okay, let's move on then. Let's go to the next picture in sequence. I'm not sure what it is anymore. We're kind of out of sequence, so I'm not sure where we're going. Okay, this is one of the very early May Day celebrations. This actually took place in Maryland back at the turn of the century. And you see the pole in the background there. And these young, I think this was dated 1907 here. I looked in earnest to try to find some pictures of May Day celebrations in Rocky Mount. The only one I have is one we've shared on the show before, and I was going to include that, and I honestly forgot to. But if you remember, we've shown a picture in the past of a May Day celebration that took place over at Glenwood Hall, there by the city lake, across the road from the city lake, in the general area where Lakeside Baptist Church is now. But that was the only picture that I had of any May Day celebration, and I scoured the newspapers.com website, tried to find additional pictures from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and just could not. So anyway, these are from around the world, and this one here, in fact, is one of the few that I found from the United States, and this happens to be from Maryland, and I think the date was 1907. But you see there, the pole itself, the May Day pole, often associated with flowers and dancing and singing around the pole. I'm guessing this was some kind of women's college. Don't see any guys in the picture, so they appear to all be young ladies. But anyway, let's move on to the next one, and let's see where we are here. Okay, this is actually from, I believe this picture is from the Netherlands, and it dates back to the 16th century. This is the one I was thinking when I had in mind when I said 16th century. It's actually from a painting. But as you see, there's a maypole there, kind of off to the left. They're a little bit off-center, dancing around the pole. But anyway, there's a lot of nuances, if you will, to the celebration. As I said, there's some dark sides to it because over the years I saw articles, multiple newspaper articles, where there were literally riots and just a lot of chaos and really sad events took place where laborers would revolt, if you will. And so it was not always a celebration of spring and happy times and flowers and dancing around a maypole and being happy and joyful. In fact, the Soviet Union to this day celebrates May Day by having a big arms show on May Day. And they fly their planes and they parade their jets, and it's a big event to promote the military. And so other countries do as well, by the way. But and Randy Harrell sent me a text says that Brazil does their Labor Day on May 1st, and that's what I was saying earlier. Some countries still refer to it as Labor Day. In different parts of the world, it's referred to as Labor Day, whereas, of course, we celebrate Labor Day in September. But it has its origins, its roots in the labor movement, when workers were mistreated and abused and by all accounts not treated fairly. And so that's how it came into existence. So let's go ahead to our next image then. This might be the one of the Russian military. And I don't know how I got so far out of sequence here with my pictures. Okay, this is actually, can we zoom out on this, Lee? One thing I should have said too at the beginning, ordinarily for each week's show, I will print off a copy of the pictures that Lee has in there on the computer in the control room, so that I can read the fine print on the pictures that you're being shown on the TV screen. And I was a bit pressed for time tonight, and fortunately did not have time to do that, so I did not print these off. But I found this headline, and you see this from Friday, April 25th of 1941, and elaborate plans being made for Baby May Day Parade. So in 1941 in Rocky Mount, there was actually two Baby May Day parades. One took place on Main Street, and it was for kids from 2 years old to 6 years old. And they would dress them all up, and they'd have little floats, and then the kids, that would take place on one day, and then the second parade would take place a day or so later, and they'd parade around the city lake. They would have contests, and they would award prizes to the cutest baby, the prettiest baby, and I thought it was odd they had one prize for the cutest and another prize for the prettiest. But in any case, I guess they would want to award a little boy the prettiest Baby May Day recipient, so they would have that for the girls, I'm guessing. But anyway, they would have several events for these kids. And as I said, this kind of coincided with the celebrations that went on with the Gallopade event and the Gallopade parade. So this was a way for the city to incorporate the kids into the celebration. And of course, the big Gallopade parade, everyone participated in that. There were kids involved in that as well. But this headline, April 1941, and it's a long article. I just cut out the top headline to show you that headline, but it was a very long article that talked about all the plans and all the preparations going into the Baby May Day events and parade. So, okay, I see it's time for our next commercial break. So Lee, bring it back to me. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about, well, you know what? My pictures got all out of whack, and I don't know how I did that. It's certainly on me. I take full responsibility. So I'm really not sure. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about some more spur tracks. I think that's what's happened. I somehow or another got my pictures out of sequence. So when we come back, you and I will both see at the same time what we got next. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Wayback Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
There's a main nerve that leaves your back that goes into your hip and goes down your leg. It's called the sciatic nerve. A back injury can put pressure on that nerve, causing pain, numbness, tingling. Chiropractors can actually help that. At the Hammer Chiropractic Center on Sunset, we know exactly what to do. We have very good relationships with the doctors in Rocky Mount. We like to co-manage people's care. Some medications may help us do our jobs, and our jobs may help their medications work better.
Okay, we're back. During the break, Lee and I were discussing, let me just show you, you can't see this, I'm sure. This is a list of the pictures, over here on this side anyway. And so I make little notes by them, and they're numbered. If I have 20 pictures, number 1 through 20. If I have 30, number 1 through 30, so forth. Somehow or another, when I made this page here, and I copy these pictures to a flash drive, and I give that to Lee, he's going to take a picture of this, and we'll see if we can get back on some kind of track. But somehow or another, when I made the list and put it on a flash drive and gave it to Lee, they got all discombobulated. We don't know how that happened. Something I did, I'm sure. So I'll take the blame for that. But in any case, we're trying to sort it out now. So bear with us just a minute, okay? He took a picture of my list. So I'm not sure, honestly, which ones we've shown. He mentioned National Graphic. There are some National Graphic pictures that we wanted to get to earlier. So I think, Lee, if you've got my list, let's go to item number 6, because that is where I thought we were going to go a while ago when we went to the Mayday stuff. I thought we were going to some more spur track information. So, and what this is just some, this is another Mayday. This is, what number is this in your list, Lee?
That was the next one in mine.
Okay, all right. So that, and again, this is in New York, and this was dated, what date is that, Lee?
4/27/1951.
Okay, 4/27/1951. And you see there, it says to review parade, General Douglas MacArthur will review a parade of an estimated 500,000. Can you imagine a parade with 500,000 Loyalty Day marchers on the 5th Avenue tomorrow? The parade is expected to last 8 or 9 hours. The deposed Far East commander will ride at the head of the parade in an automobile with Francis Cardinal Spellman from the 95th to 67th Street. Then in a reviewing stand, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the sponsors of the parade since 1948, to counteract communist May Day celebrations, estimate the number of marchers. The previous total was 250,000 in 1949. So I mentioned earlier that in the Soviet Union and in Soviet bloc countries, May Day is a big deal. It's a very big deal. It's one of the bigger celebrations. They, show off their military hardware. They dress in all their finest military attire, and they had these huge parades and so forth. And so this event that took place in New York with General MacArthur reviewing the parade was basically a rebuttal, if you will, to the events that were going on in the Soviet Union. And so, and I suppose it's probably a good thing that this practice eventually did kind of die down, and I don't ever remember in my lifetime hearing about this type of parade that was specifically designed to kind of thumb the nose, if you will, at another country. So, but anyway, so that was just another example of what was going on with May Day celebrations around the world. As I said, it was in the European countries, May 1st has a more significant meaning, I think, because it is so closely related and tied to the labor movement than here in the United States, where we typically associate May 1 as the official start of spring, if you will. even though it's not meteorologically the first day of spring. It's typically a time when we would celebrate the spring and flowers and the maypole dancing and so forth. It's a happy celebration. Okay. All right, let's move on then. I'm not sure what's next, so you hit what's next on your list and we'll go from there. I'm sorry? Okay. He and I are working together to pull this together tonight, and I do apologize. As I said, I don't know what happened. Apparently my computer had a hiccup. I'm going to blame it on the computer. That's right. It was the computer's fault. And so as soon as we get this thing sorted out, he'll have one up on the screen for us. And whatever comes up, we'll talk about it, because I'm not sure what it's going to be, quite frankly. And by the way, if you got any comments, you got a memory about May Day, or if you remember going to a May Day celebration, give us a call. 407-1111 is the number. We'd love to hear from you. You know, there's so many of these, and we've said before, and talked many times about the celebrations that have taken place in years past that are no longer here. And the Gallopay is one example, the June Germans are another, May Day celebrations. Here we go. This is what I was getting at earlier. This was an example of a spur track that was put in place specifically for this company. And Lee, if you could zoom in on that caption for me, because I do not have a copy of this picture. Oh, we got a call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller. You on the air?
All right, you're talking about the May Day out there where the Glenwood Hall was, out there where Lakeside Baptist Church later became.
Right.
When those little children graduated and got out of first grade out there, that was a celebration that took place out there in that Piney Grove right there across from where Lakeside Baptist Church is, between there and the city lake. But those children that were a part of the Glenwood Hall kindergarten and first grade in the early 50s.
Right. I've got a picture of that, actually. I've got a few pictures, and I should have included them in this because I remember they were part of the May Day celebration. But you're right. That was a big deal.
Goodbye.
All right, buddy. Have a good one. We'll see you. Okay. So, okay, Lee, can you zoom in on this just so I can read the caption for our viewers? Coburn was the company, and I'm not familiar with them. I don't remember anything about them. They obviously manufacture mobile homes. There you go, Coburn's first mobile home. Here's the first mobile home unit produced by Coburn Industries. It will be used as an office. The unit is 50 feet long and 10 feet wide. It says Coburn Industries in Nashville, Nashville's newest industry, rolled out the first mobile home this week. But they put a spur track in. I'm trying to see where that, there you go. It says grading work has also been completed on the spur track, which will be laid down from the Atlantic coastline tracks to the plant site. So this is an example of, as I said earlier, I guess it was fairly commonplace for businesses to request a spur track. And of course, the railroad certainly had the right to decline. But if they so chose to do so, they could put a spur track off the main track to these businesses. And there was a couple different spur tracks that were created in the Nashville area for businesses that were close proximity. This picture here actually, you can go ahead and put that back up, Lee. That's fine. That's the next one in line. That's fine. We've talked a little bit in the past about a movie that was called Waves of Green. And it was about farming and agriculture in the Deep South back in the 1920s or 30s, I think it was. And this was actually taken as they were filming a scene somewhere in Edgecombe County. And it's hard to see here, but there's a spur track off the other side of that truck there. And they would actually have some of the scenes were utilizing some of the spur tracks for purposes of moving the cameras around and so forth. And this particular shot here, they've got the camera on the truck, of course, but they made mention in this article about using the spur track and somehow mounting a camera on some kind of rail cart or whatever. They could roll down the spur track. And so I wish the picture had been of the camera on the spur track, but they made mention of the spur track. But this is what that's from. It's from that movie, Waves of Grain, and I think that picture was made somewhere, golly, it was made in the 50s, 1950, I think exactly is when the film was made, but it was actually, the date setting was back much earlier than that. So anyway, all right, let's go to the next one then. And I'm not sure, there you go. This is a spur track. This is actually the picture they were just talking about in that article. This was the spur track that was being laid down for that Coburn mobile home manufacturing. And maybe someone remembers that. I can't say I do. I don't know where this was. It was somewhere in Nashville. I'm guessing maybe somewhere over near Nashville Building Supply, back over that area, back over there. The train track runs by there. But if anyone remembers that or knows where that was, give us a call, 407-1111. But again, this was a track that was requested by Coburn for the ACL to bring a spur track to them so that they could load and unload product, building materials and so forth at this new plant that was put in place there. All right, Lee, let's go on to the next one. And here we go. I mentioned that there were a couple places. This is actually between Nashville and Spring Hope out there. Peden Steel. I think this place is actually called something else now. I think it's still there under a different name. But if you ride Old 64, leaving Nashville and Old 64, headed toward Momire and on toward Spring Hope, this place is on the left. They make these huge steel girders that you see in highway, interstate bridges and so forth. Probably used in buildings too, but they're just tremendously huge. Some of these things weigh 10 and 12 tons. But they put a spur track in for this place too. And, we got a call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller, you on the air?
All right, that place where Peden Steel had up there between Nashville and Momire is a road that turns off of 64 alternate Breedlove Road.
Right.
And they make those great big steel bridge beams now.
Yep.
Before those people were there, I think Peden Steel was located on that property.
Yeah, and is there still a plant there? They still make those things, but I don't think it's Peden anymore, is it? Have they changed?
I don't know. It isn't. It's I don't remember the name, but it's the people that were there before it was Peden Steel.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Have a good one. Okay. Yeah, like I said, they still are in operation there. The plant is still there, still making those big, huge I-beams. But yeah, I rode by there recently, in fact, on the way I had to go on a service call over toward Spring Hope, and I rode right by there. But I cannot remember the name of the place now. But they're still in operation anyway, just not called Peden anymore. Okay, Lee, let's go on to the next one then. And there you go. This article I found interesting because as some spur tracks were being pulled up, taken down, taken out of service, others, there were people rallying to keep them open. This one says, industry is using the Seaboard System Railroad Company spur track that runs from Rocky Mount through Nashville to Spring Hope may form an independent company. By the way, Lee, which one is this? I'm sorry, I don't have. Can you tell me which the date is on this?
7/3/1984.
Okay, July the 3rd, 1984 is when this article appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram. And it goes on to say, area industries that would be affected by the abandonment of the spur line include Union Camp, American Rock Wool, and Masonite. Nash Industrial Director Bill Rose said Monday the industries are considering several alternatives to keep the line open. One possibility might be some kind of subsidy to the railroad to keep the line open, Rose said. Another would be for the industries to set up an independent system to operate a train along the route. The industries could operate such a line much cheaper than the Seaboard could, Rose told the Nash County Board of Commissioners. Rose said the railroad must tack on a lot of overhead and it also must operate with union crews. A lot of this could be cut down if the system was independently run, he said. Seaboard is considering abandoning the line and expects to make a final decision in about 6 months. Rose said the railroad claims to be losing around $300,000 a year on the spur track. They move about 3,000 cars a year over the line, and most of the loadings are from low revenue producing items such as wood chips and pulpwood or slag. But industry representatives feel the line is absolutely essential to their operation. According to Rose, it's critical to Nash County to have a spur track open, he said. Rose said he would report back to the commissioners on Seaboard Coastline's plans after the railroad has had a chance to develop a detailed analysis of the spur track operation. I was not able to determine for certain whether or not they did indeed close that spur track. I think the track is still in place, in fact. But as far as being used, I do know that if you know where Bass Farm Sausage is out there just outside of Momire, between Momire and Spring Hope, way back behind behind Bass Sausage back there, is that spur track they're talking about, and I think it's still there. There's probably a dozen train cars that were part of a circus. In fact, as recently as a year or two ago, there was an effort to sell some of those train cars, and they were still there as recently as about a year ago. So with those cars on that track, my guess is it's not being used, because obviously with those cars, because they're stationary, they're not there temporarily, they've been parked there while there's an effort made to sell the cars. And so I'm fairly certain that track has been abandoned by the railroad company, and no one else apparently has made an effort to put it back into use. So right now it's a storage rail, if you will, for these 8 or 10 or 12, how many cars it is, that were part of an old circus train. So anyway, I see by the clock on the wall it's time. Lee, we got anything else left?
That was the last National Graphic one right there.
Okay, this was just one from the National Graphic back in the, I think, 1970 or so. And it was talking about a store in Nashville, and they had a spur track. The Atlantic Coast Line Road put a spur track in for them as well. So, as I said at the top of the show, you know, spur tracks are all over Rocky Mount, all over this part of the state, in fact, and they played a critical part in the operation of businesses. And when the threat of spur track being removed came about, particularly that stretch there between Nashville and Spring Hope, it created a lot of discontent, a lot of heartache, and a lot of concern. I think it eventually did get abandoned, because like I said, that track now has got trains literally sitting on it, not moving. So anyway, that's going to do it for us tonight, folks. I apologize again for the confusion with the picture order. That was totally my fault. Not sure what happened. We'll try to get it better next week. Have a good week. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another, and we'll see you next week with more Way Back Wednesday. Good night.